Hello, my name's Gretchen Lida. Welcome to HN Reads on Horse Network. This is our monthly show where I get to talk to an equestrian author about their book, and we talk about writing and books and writing with an R, and horses, of course. This month, I am so excited to be interviewing the author of Distant Skies, Melissa A. Priblo Chapman. Melissa is amazing. She went on a 2,600-mile trek across the United States when she was 23. And she is a freelance writer. She has her work published in magazines, including the Western Horseman, Good Dog, Doggone, and Doggone. Her story, Gypsy the Cross-Country Dog, appears in the book Traveler Tales, A Dog's World, alongside the works of such renowned authors such as Gary Paulson. Chapman has been a paid speaker to over 100 organizations in regard to her solo cross-country trip and is a member of the Long Riders Guild, a worldwide league of equestrian adventurers. Chapman is a married mother of 4. She lives in upstate New York and rides every day and continues to share her life with her horses and her dogs. Welcome, Melissa Chapman.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you. We're so lucky to have you. And you have a short reading for us picked out?
I do. You asked me to pick out a little reading that we could start the show with, and of the stories that are in my book, because this is the Horse Network, I picked a story called Trust, and it's towards the second half of the book, towards the western part of the country, and it shows the bond and what trust is between a horse and a rider. My adventure made the connections I developed with people I met along the way happen more quickly and strongly than when meeting people in the real world. Others who have traveled recount experiencing the same phenomena. I felt emotional leaving the Juarez family outside Flagstaff, where I'd been so welcomed into their home. When I set out, with sweet memories and extra clothes, they said, "Call when you get to California." The doubts and worries about a girl alone on the road had mostly been replaced with the assumption that if I'd made it to Arizona, I was probably going to make it all the way. It was hard for me to think too broadly. I took each day as its own time, and I never assumed anything was a given. I knew that with each step we took and each road we rode on, there were many ways things could go right or wrong. I took nothing for granted. California was somewhere else. Arizona was here and now. In this here and now, we had the woods again. After months on the plains and the desert plateaus, I felt welcomed into the arms of trees. We rode on trails through sweet-smelling pines and stands of aspen with gold leaves flickering in the wind like a million candle flames. The air was cool in a way that was both invigorating and familiar. Rainey seemed to feel it too. Both he and Amanda walked with spirit in their steps. The view changed as we rode, and vistas opened up when there was a break in the trees. We seemed to be ever climbing. The view was gorgeous, but it startled me to see how high up the trail had led us. The land sloped away steeply to the south on my left into meadows of yellow grass, and beyond that, more evergreen forest. I was not particularly comfortable with heights, so I tried to focus instead on the trail in front of us. We moved forward, climbing more. Gypsy, who had been up in the saddle with me, suddenly wanted to get down. Once there, she did none of the usual sniffing and exploring. Instead, she placed herself way in the back of our little line, following Amanda. The trail narrowed further. Amanda shifted away from her usual position, slightly to the back but alongside Rainey, and stepped directly behind him instead. We were all now in one straight line. Rainey in front carrying me, then Amanda, then Gypsy. And it was a good thing, because the trail was now so narrow, there was no other way we'd fit. I no longer looked at the view or admired our surroundings. I was well past my comfort zone with heights. Rainey seemed focused on keeping his head level and picking his way carefully along the path. The trail had shrunk to a width I was well aware we should not be on. A thin, worn line where you had to place one foot carefully in front of the other and almost hug the uphill side to keep from slipping. What if the trail narrowed and ended? We couldn't turn around, and I couldn't imagine all 4 of us backing down what we had just come up. It was so steep on the side of the mountain that now, to my left, the drop was practically vertical. Boulders jutted out in spots, and tenacious scrub trees reached out from places where their roots were able to take hold. I forced myself to take a peek, and a swoop of nausea overcame me. I was scared, but I didn't want to stop Rainey because I was afraid to break his concentration or cause him to look down or step wrong. If one of us went down the side of the mountain, we were all going, and it would be a long fall. I began to tremble and willed it to stop so Rainey wouldn't sense my fear, but I had no control over it. I could feel through the rope in my hand that Amanda was studiously keeping Rainey's exact, careful pace. I didn't let myself turn and look at her or Gypsy because I didn't want to do anything that might shift our balance even one iota. Instead, I focused on a spot on Rainey's neck. I looked at the way his black mane fell to one side. I watched the glide of his shoulder with each step he took, but my eyes shifted. I couldn't help it, and I looked down again. That was it for me. Rainey, this wonderful horse, he didn't seem to be scared or hesitant. He wanted to keep going. So I leaned forward slowly and let the reins become a loose drape. Riders are taught that it's important to be the leader with a horse. We're supposed to be in charge at all times. But I closed my eyes and put us all in Rainey's care. Every ounce of trust and faith I had, I put in Rainey. He never faltered. He kept up his steady walk, placing each sturdy black hoof in the right place, one step at a time. After what felt like hours but could have been minutes, the trail began to widen again. We kept moving forward slowly. Gradually, we descended from the views and the cliff and my fear until Rainey safely brought us all to a flat dirt road through the pines.
Thank you so much, Melissa.
You're welcome.
I was like so into it that I forgot that I was going to ask you questions.
Thank you.
I also wanted to note to our audience, if you have questions for Melissa about writing a book or about horses or about riding real far or all those other things, please leave them in the comments and we'd love to answer them for you. So my first question is I wanted you to describe for me your companions that went with you on this trip. So describe Amanda and Rainey and Gypsy for me.
Thanks. Well, you can gather from that story that Rainey was to me, I always say he's the hero of the story because he was that once in a lifetime horse, and he just took to this adventure I set us out on like he was just as glad to do it as I was. That is a picture right there of Rainey on literally the day we left. That's outside Binghamton, New York, and it was taken by a neighbor on Conklin Forks Road. And you can see that Gypsy's just a young puppy when we started out, and Rainey's all packed up. And then along with us came Gypsy that you just saw, and she was a late addition. I had worked a lot on conditioning Rainey and working and planning, and I did not have planned to bring a dog. But I had several experiences where it just felt like something was missing, and I ended up picking out Gypsy, and she was a very important addition to the trip. I think it was meant to be that she was along with us. So that's how we started out and did almost the first, half of the country really until Kansas. And then later on, you'll be introduced to Amanda, who's a mule, and we got her in Kansas, and she did the second half of the trip with us as a pack animal.
I love the story where you decide to change her name. Can you describe why you decided to change her name? It was like my favorite detail. I'm like, oh, that's so good.
I made the very naive mistake, and if there's any mule people out there that are listening to this, they'll be nodding their head going, oh yeah, because when Rainey, there's a part in the story, in the book, you'll see where Rainey gets injured somewhat, and we had to lay up for a while, and that's a whole other story. But the veterinarian that had checked Rainey over, and he said, I think at this point you should be thinking about a pack animal, because he had carried everything: tent, sleeping bag, grooming, fly spray, food, everything, halfway across the country. And I wasn't sure that I wanted a pack animal. I wanted to see how he did, but this opportunity to get her came up. And I just thought, well, how different can a mule be? I'm familiar with horses. So, and baptism by fire, I learned that mules are very different. And they have a bad reputation of being stubborn, but they're not stubborn. They're just opinionated, I like to say. But she, again, it felt meant to be. She came right along with us, and it worked out great.
Fantastic. Yeah, I love that picture.
Thanks. Yeah, you can see what she looks like all packed up in that picture. And the funny thing about it is, as you can probably tell, I know you read the book, that we got stopped a lot by reporters and so on. But once Amanda joined us, it was funny because people used to stop and go, "Are you searching for gold?" I guess she looked like every cartoonist picture of a little prospector's donkey or something. But she is a mule. She's a little mini mule, and that's how she looked all packed up.
And what was she crossed with?
They think probably like a Welsh pony and a burro. She was maybe like 12 and a half hands high, like a good sized pony. Tough as could be though, just rugged little animal.
Yeah, a Welsh pony and a donkey cross. Like that is a tough opinionated baby.
Yeah.
I love Welsh ponies, but they're very opinionated.
Because she's a little more refined looking than some mules. Like some mules have kind of like the big, and I love mules, don't get me wrong, but they have a different look. She almost looked like a little horse with really big ears, you know. So that's why they kind of thought maybe a Welsh, because sometimes they're crossed with, you know, draft type animals and so on. And another thing that people always are surprised by was that Gypsy sometimes rode. She was trained to heel with the horse and to stay with us, which she always did. But sometimes I would ask her to come up because we were in, dealing with traffic or a scary situation of some kind. But other times she would just get tired, and I could always tell. I'd look down, she'd be like kind of going alongside, looking up, and we had kind of a signal where I'd pat the saddle, and she learned to jump right up there. And that picture kind of shows how she looks, how she can sit right on the saddle there.
And what made Rainey such a good long distance horse? I guess I don't not quite know what the term I would use to call her. What made him so perfect?
Well, it was both his physical makeup and his character and his personality, and we all know that the horse world is full of many different personalities, and I fell in love with him almost instantly, pretty much instantly. But when the vet came to check him out, he said, he's got a little draft blood in him. He looked very quarter horse, and they were selling him as a quarter horse, but he didn't have papers. But he just had a little more feathering down on his legs. And back then, that was in the 70s, believe it or not, there was a trend with quarter horses where people were saying they were making them look like thoroughbreds, and they were trimming the feet little and all. And he had sort of nice big, almost not flat feet, but like bigger. And the vet said he'll be good for long distance, and you won't have any trouble with his feet and so on. So there was that. And believe it or not, that is true. That horse walked close to 3,000 miles just then. That's not counting all the training before that and all the years he lived with me after that. And he's never ever was lame or off, with that. So that part was true. But the most important thing, I think, was just his personality. He just was quite unflappable, and he was young, but I very rarely hear trainers talk about this. I have a few times, but he had curiosity, and you don't hear that often with horses. But I remember one time we were somewhere and he saw a campfire, and he just like walked towards it, almost put his nose in it. And there was a few times like something would be in the air and he'd stop and, what I mean? He just had this sort of interest in the world around him. So he was a great horse for something like this because he wasn't afraid of things. Like all horses have that flight instinct, but he was people oriented, and he was just sort of, I think, happy to be out in the world. So as soon as I bought him and started riding him, I knew that he was not a horse that was wanting to go around in a ring or anything like that, that he and I could go out there in the world together. And he certainly proved that was true.
This is the most horse girl question ever. How tall was he?
He was right about 15 hands.
Okay. Yeah, that's a nice height.
Yeah, just everything was just right with him. I was very lucky.
You're right. This kind of goes along with this question, but you talk a lot in the book about how, you wanted to do this. This was like a lifelong dream when you were a little kid to do this. And what do you think it was about? I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. I've been thinking about it all day. What do you think it is about you or your childhood or your life that made you want to do this? Were your parents adventurous? Like, were you always adventurous kids? Like, what made you want to go out?
You know what? I think there's all kinds of ways to be adventurous. And I guess I would say that is true of my parents. We moved several times, and I know my dad was always like coming up with an idea or starting a business or getting a degree. So I think that's a different kind of adventurous. My mom, the same way. They were just people that sort of embraced life and raised myself and my siblings to be sort of confident and to, know yourself and know what you want. But for myself, I was always an outdoorsy kid. I remember the first part of my growing up, we lived in Pennsylvania, and there was this, we called it the woods, where I would go and just pretend I lived there and pretend I was like a little wild person or something. But as an adult, when I go back through there, I just laugh because it's literally like this little patch. It's not even probably a quarter of an acre, but when you're a little kid, I mean, we thought it was the woods, But I know a lot of kids, they say that kids have a fear of being lost. And I must have been weird because I used to try to get lost. Like I just was intrigued by the adventure of being out there in the world like that. So I didn't have a horse when I grew up. I did not grow up on a farm or with a horsey family or anything. So it was a fantasy. Like I just dreamed about it and just thought, what a perfect thing. Like I'd love to ride. I'd love to be outdoors. I just want to do that, and it sort of grew from there.
Fabulous. Can you describe a little bit what it was like to condition yourself and condition Rainey?
Well, you know what? When I got Rainey, I was 19. So it was a lot easier to be in condition than it is now. And I worked at night when I started. Like first, the trip was sort of like I would talk about it, or I'd fantasize or dream about it or look up things, but I wasn't really like doing anything about it. But when I started to, for real, plan that trip, it was really about riding, and also for a horse that you want to be a super good trail horse or distance horse. There's nothing better than just riding. Like I would look up things about pulse and respiration, and my vet would give me advice, and I'd work on riding him on hills and stuff. But for the mental training and the physical, it was just being out there riding. So I worked at night. I worked on a third shift job for towards the end of the time before I left, and that was great because it would give me the daylight hours. And we just started wandering around. We just started trying to do a 10-mile ride or just kind of went like that. And you could see the difference. It's a very hilly area, this area where I live. And I had a horse for years that came from a friend of mine, and she came back to visit him, and she said, he's really muscled up, and it's because I used him for trail riding and they used him for other things. And around here, that means hills. So that was a big part of it. And you do have to educate yourself. I went for a couple of days with my farrier at the time, just not to try to replace that because I value that kind of profession with my horse. But in case of emergency, if you were in the middle of nowhere and had to pull a shoe or, things like that. So we did a lot of that kind of like preparation, both for myself and for Rainey.
I know from other like long riders that I've heard from is that shoes are an issue. What were the shoes like that you used on Rainey?
And a shout out, he's no longer with us, but my farrier at that time was named Larry Reed, and he came up with this sort of custom made shoes that he had for Rainey. They had toe clips to keep, help keep them on longer. He had a little borium on them, and then he had pads because he would be doing a lot of concussive type work. And then he injected silicone in the pads. And my farrier that I have now told me that silicone's sort of out now. There's better things they have than that. But you know what? That horse, like I said, he never took a lame step. And in fact, we got from upstate New York to Western Ohio before they had to be reset. And that farrier, there's a little story about that in the book too. But then they were reset again in Kansas. And then that set of shoes finally got too thin. And I don't know if it still exists, but there was a thing called the New Mexico School of Horseshoeing, and they were not on the route where I was. And they actually reached out to us, after they'd seen us in the news and so on, and said, hey, that's like such an unusual set of shoes, and we would like to use Rainey in our school if you got to have them reset. And of course, we won't charge you. They came all the way up and got us, took us to the horseshoeing school. And I said, if he's going in somewhere, Amanda's got to go by that point. And then took us all the way back to where we were so that we wouldn't, be trailering around and back to where we were staying so that they could see those shoes. But the actual shoes lasted from New York into New Mexico. They were thin by the time we took them off. I
That's a
did a new
long
set.
way for a pair
Yeah.
of shoes.
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
crazy.
So yeah,
Were they fronts and backs?
fronts and backs for that trip. Yeah. Yep.
That's nuts. They lasted 2,000
Yep.
miles.
Yep. I still have them. They're hanging out in my barn.
What do you think the biggest challenge of the trip was?
You know what? I'm a person that I really like meeting people and hearing their stories, and I guess I'm sociable, but I'm also comfortable alone. And I felt I was raised in a bigger family, and so you kind of value that time alone. I think there's a line in the book that someone told me where it says, "You don't realize what alone is until it means like really alone for a long time." And that I was lonely, like at the beginning. It was weird because I was a young person, and you have a busy social life at that age, and like I said, I came from a bigger family, and to just go, oh, I'd like to be alone, and then all of a sudden you're alone all the time, and I never considered myself truly alone. Like I never felt sad and lonely because Rainey and Gypsy were such a presence, and then later Amanda. Like I never felt like, oh, I'm so alone, but it was that human connection that you do need sometimes. So you could tell there's a lot of people in my story. It's in the book. It's not just me and my animals. There's a lot of different characters and people that kind of step in and out of the story, and I really did value that. So in the beginning, being alone a lot was a big adjustment. Later on it kind of flipped, and that sort of became my way of life. And then like coming back home was a big adjustment. Still is in a way. So it really wasn't just a trip. It was just a way that we lived for a while, and I did adjust to it, but that was mostly it at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. A friend of mine and I, she was taking over my job when I ran a horse farm, and I really learned how to be alone because I would spend hours and hours and hours like cleaning the barn by myself on this farm in the middle of near Wyoming, and it was just like, and in some ways, I wonder if this is true for you, but I feel like that time alone really taught me how to get through the pandemic, in a way.
I can see where that makes sense. And I still value time alone, still like meeting people and so on, and value my friends and family. But I know exactly what you mean and it's not to make light of it, but one of the things I still love is I still ride by myself just because circumstances dictate that. If I had to wait for someone to ride with, I would never ride. So hardly get to ride. So I know what you mean. Like when it first happened, it was very stressful for a lot of people. And I was kind of like, well, I ride alone in the morning, and then the dogs and I hike or something, so it's kind of used to that. So that, there's other worries and stuff with the pandemic, but I know what you mean. It teaches you to be sort of self-reliant and enjoy your own company when you have it, especially if you can be around horses or be outdoors. That adds a lot to it.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think what do you think the biggest difference, like seems like kind of obvious, but it might be fun to pick apart a little bit, but what do you think is the difference between like someone who treks on foot or uses a bicycle versus someone who or does dog sledding versus like taking a horse? Like what makes trekking with a horse unique?
You know what? It's very unique because there's two parts to that, and there are a fair amount of people that have biked across the country. I hear from them every now and then, or actually know several people from our area, and parts that are the same is you still have that, like you're not enclosed in a car going 75 miles an hour, and you do see things. You stop and talk to people. You get a feel for where you are more than just passing through. The difference with the horses is that a horse can't just go anywhere. And there were a few times we tried to avoid cities and bigger, busier areas, but sometimes it was unavoidable. And you can't just say, well, I think I'll camp here on Main Street tonight and tie my horse to a street light. It's different. And so you have this need to find places that not just you and a dog, which could be almost anywhere. You could even get hotel rooms, but you have a horse. And so that makes a big difference. Like we had to, it's talked about in the book, this network of people that sort of stepped up, and that made a big difference because you have to have somewhere that a horse is safe. I mean, we spent a few nights in weird places, but most of the time it was barns and ranches and so on that, watched out for us. And even if it was in very remote areas, which happened more as we got farther west, like I'd ride somewhere and I wouldn't be anywhere near a town or a ranch house, but somebody would have cattle pens or something by the railroad track, and I'd get there and there'd be like a bale of hay with a note on it, and somebody would leave a sandwich for me or something. So there was like these connections, even though we were farther apart. But that's definitely a big thing, is you have the responsibility for this 1,000-pound animal that's you're taking with you everywhere.
What did the trip teach you about horsemanship?
You know what? It taught me about always putting the horse first. I know that's like an old thing that you hear in cowboy movies and so on, but it's absolutely true, because there's something wrong with asking a horse to do all this stuff that's probably against his nature for you all day long, and then just leaving him tied somewhere so you can go in and eat. And it just always taught me to put him before myself. And I also feel that when it was kind of neat when I was putting the book together, because times have certainly changed, but you know what? Like the basics of good horsemanship hasn't changed. You want to be sure that they have movement and fresh air in their lives, and that they have things they're interested in, that they're not just standing in a stall, and good clean water and good food, and that you're like tuned into them so that if something's wrong, you can start picking up on it. And you kind of get into their way of communicating. And I don't think that'll ever change. I think that was probably important hundreds of years ago. And those simple things will probably always be important to horses and horsemanship,
Yeah, I think that's super, super true. And hopefully it will never change, but I don't think it will.
Yeah.
Especially with all that we're learning about horses and their emotions and attachment and different things
Yeah.
like that. I think it'll get even more intense, perhaps, right?
I think people are more open to that now too. They're more like, there's a lot of clinicians and so on out there now that are focusing on, I remember years ago we went somewhere this was actually at a college that taught animal husbandry, and there was a horse tied somewhere, and he was fussing, pawing and stuff. And this girl walks over and she just kicks him in the stomach, and we all we sort of looked at her and she goes, "You have to show them who's boss," and I think that old style of, show them who's boss, and that, there'll always be people that do that. But I think people are realizing they're sensitive beings that think and feel, and that we can work with them and not have it all be force, And I'm certainly not trying to pass myself off as a horse trainer. I've been lucky with the horses that I have, that other people mostly trained, but my part was building a relationship, and I think you see that more and more with horses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also think it comes through really, really clearly, like how deeply devoted to Rainey you are to Rainey, and how in return he takes good care of you. And I think that's super wonderful.
He did. He absolutely did. And I think that's why I would like to say that I think Distant Skies would be an interesting book for anyone any discipline. Like, it's not for just trail riders or distance riders or anything, because it's really more about the relationship. That's why I picked that one reading, Trust, because it was just this point where it's like, he knows better than I do right now, and I'm going to trust him on that kind of thing, and that can carry through and help in any discipline of horsemanship, that communication and level of reciprocal trust between a horse and a rider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's super good. The other thing I think I also want to talk a little bit about is one of the things that comes up a lot with horses and with this kind of an adventure is the concept of fear, and what we should be afraid of and what we shouldn't be. And, I think, we talked a little bit earlier about your mom being nervous. Did people tell you? So what did you learn about being afraid, or what fear really is, or how to manage your own emotion when you were out there?
There were times that fear was part of this. I mean, any kind of adventure, it wouldn't be an adventure if you weren't going out on a limb somewhat, And I do want to say, when people ask me, what was the time you were most afraid? What was the scariest part? And I want to say that it was never, the scariest parts were never from a human, which I think is just sort of an interesting observation. We had a run-in with a rattlesnake, but the most absolute times that I was fearful, and I couldn't put every story about it, was storms. And, born and raised in the Northeast, and there's buildings and tall trees and hills, and lightning seems like something that's up in the sky. The first time I there is a story in there on Crescent Mountain in Western Pennsylvania, but later I realized when I had the whole book and I started having to take things out, I was like, I have like 3 scary storm stories in here, And the first time that I was in the Midwest, where of course the land flattens out quite a bit, is in Indiana, and I was right. We just got caught in a dark, angry thunder and lightning storm, and then it was like you can see this lightning kind of cracking in front of you and hitting the ground, and it was very scary. And I remember thinking, oh, like there's no trees. I'm the highest thing sitting on this horse, so I get off the horse, and we're going through the rain. And then I was like, now he's the highest thing. I don't want him to be the highest thing. So alongside the road, there's a fairly deep ditch because there's crops and stuff all around. So we get in the ditch and we sort of like crouch down. I've got Gypsy. We're getting poured on. It's lightning. It's thunder. And I'm in the ditch and it's filling up with water. And I'm like, now we're in water. I think that's the worst thing. And while I'm in the water trying to decide which thing's worse, these black things start coming down the ditch in the water. Well, where I had ridden, there's these big fat, I think they call them corn snakes, these big black fat snakes. So I'm like in the ditch going, out there, lightning, in here, snake. So, like this there were definitely times of fear. But I think I learned about that because fear is something I still deal with or sort of has reared its ugly head as I've gotten older, and I still ride alone and so on. I'm more careful, but I know that you learn that you just have to get through it. And that's why, again, I think maybe this book, even if you're not a horse person, I think that's sort of like not trying to hit anyone over the head, like I have some big message, but I think like it keeps coming through that you just keep going. You hit these obstacles, you have doubt or fear, and you figure out a way to keep going. And I think that that's like a good lesson, even if it's not with horses, I mean, you can get fearful because you've done something stupid. I mean, that could happen, but within reason, you just sort of find this way to sort of power through or around or figure it out and make it work, and that's still how I deal with fear now. But that's one of the many lessons I did learn from that, going out on that trip like that.
Yeah, I think you're also explaining like how fear is sometimes useful and sometimes not.
Yeah.
Right. Like that lightning storm, you're like, yeah, I do have to protect myself. But other times it was one of those things you had to power through. And I took up my sport that I decided to do during the pandemic was I took up open water swimming. And there were days that you would go, okay, I got to listen to my fear and stay out of the lake. And then there were days that you're like, no, you have to get in, even though you're scared.
Yeah. What is that? Is that like you open water, like you swim across a lake or?
Yeah, I've been swimming in Lake Michigan. Yeah.
Oh, wow. And that's a big one.
Yeah. It's similar. Yeah, no, and I don't it's like a mile, but like.
It must be a cool feeling though.
Yeah. It's strangely similar to riding horses. Like it has a similar level of like thinking about what your body's doing, what you're afraid of, what you're not afraid of, what you can handle, what you can't. Like it reminds me a lot of riding like a green horse.
Yeah. I think also with fear that an important thing that I sort of came into is, especially with my trip, because sometimes people would go, why don't you do this? Or why don't you come here? Or why don't you, and I started to go, I'm in charge of this. Like I may not be able to control everything else in the world, but I'm in charge of what happens with me and this horse. And that's something I still feel now. I won't let anyone talk me into anything. It's going to be my choice of the decisions I make. And that helps with fear situations too. You kind of know that you have that power to use your own will. Like you said, there's days where you're like, I just have a feeling I shouldn't swim out there today or something, and you should honor that and listen to that. Mm-hmm. So similar.
And also like learning that lesson of like following yourself at 23 is huge. Like some people don't learn that till they're, 70.
Yeah.
But like at 23, you learned that is pretty awesome.
Well, thank you.
One of the other things I was thinking about a lot as I was reading your book is how many lovely people were just like, yeah, come in, you want some food? Like that. I loved the scene where the Amish let the dog sleep in the house with you when the dogs aren't allowed in the house. And they're like, no, that's that dog's job. Like, I thought that scene was so good.
You know what? That was I don't know if it comes across in that book, and I hope it does, but that was kind of a pivotal experience for me because it was in the first few weeks. I think I was on the road about 2 weeks, and I didn't want to go there. I was like, oh, we're too different. And I had thought naively, like, because they live a strict life, they would try to like preach to me or convert me. It's wasn't worldly of me, but that's how I felt, and it ended up being a great experience and sort of opened me up to saying, this is you're out here because you want these experiences, and these people went out of their way to welcome me. And that was a touching moment because up to that point, Gypsy I hadn't spent a night apart from her, and no animals were ever in the house. And then she said, animals, we have a lot of animals too, but they have to have a job. Like, every animal here has a job. And then she finally looked at Gypsy and said, she has a job. She's supposed to be with you, and it was a special experience being there. And actually, I don't know if you remember Naomi from that time with the Amish, but we are still in touch and are still friends. So yeah.
Oh, that's super cute.
Yeah, it was a special friendship. I think she sensed something in me those first few weeks that I was kind of lonesome, and I think the exact words were, "Do you need a girl to talk to?" And there was nothing wrong, but it was just sort of nice. We got, we did what girlfriends do. We got talking about stuff and giggling, and it was just such a nice thing. And when I left there, I think that was the beginning of a change when I was adjusting, because I was like, this is why you came out here. It's to have these experiences and be part of something else besides your own world, So yeah, that was kind of pivotal for me.
Yeah, I thought that was a fabulous scene too.
Thanks.
And then, so one of the things that brought up for me is I was thinking about a different trekking book that came out 3 years ago. It's called Walking to Listen, and it's about this guy that he's also 23 who walks from Pennsylvania to Louisiana and then across the country.
Believe it or not, I downloaded that just a couple weeks ago.
It's good.
I loved this whole genre of books, but was it good? I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, I liked the podcast he did on This American Life a little bit better, which is where I heard it first.
Okay.
But I thought the book was so I would listen to that first and then read the book second, because of course I'm going to say it. Because but they speak really nicely to each other. And one of the things that I noticed that I was thinking about in your book that kind of fit with it is like, one of the things that he says is that the whole time, like, people would open their doors to him and they'd be all kinds of different people. And they would always be like, but watch out for those people. Those people are going to get you. Did you experience any of that?
I had the same experience as far as people, like somebody that read the book recently that contacted me. She said, it's just so weird how doors just opened up for you. But when you referred to him, when people put themselves out there, there's something about that other people respond to, people that can't do it or didn't do it, or they just see someone pursuing a dream and it touches something in people, I didn't get so much watch out for those people, but so that's a little different then. But even now, like, because my trip was a while ago, people are like, well, it's so different now, you couldn't do that now. But that's not true. You hear there will always be adventurers, and they always have the same kind of stories,
Mm-hmm. It's like in Wild and Cheryl Strayed, they're the Pacific Trail people. They call them the Trail Angels. Mm-hmm. People come along and feed you.
Yeah, the Appalachian Trail has the same too. Mm-hmm. People that just let them sleep there and feed them and leave out barrels of apples on the trail and stuff like that. I think there's and again, I was young to learn this lesson, but while I was traveling, people wanted to help. Like, there's one part I was talking to Rebecca, who works at Trafalgar Square. She said, I had mentioned all these mementos and Lucky Charms I had. She said, do you still have them? I said, I don't know if I could find them all, but yeah, I saved everything, And she said, why do you think people kept doing that? And I said, I feel like there were so many people I met that would say, and it might not be that exact thing, like ride a horse across the country. It might be, I always wanted to go to Nashville and try to sing, or go to Europe and backpack, some kind of dream. And then they would say, and then it would be like, but I'm too old, or but I got married, or but it costs too much money. And I think when they see somebody that is trying it touches something, like a little piece of them comes along if they help you out, So I think that's why you see very similar stories, whether it's a guy on a bike or this gentleman that was walking, people on the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail. You know what I mean? Like, there's other people that say, I got a little piece of that dream anyway, So I think it touches on that in people.
Yeah, it's almost as if like they get an ounce of dream
Yeah.
if they give you a sandwich.
Yeah, and a little piece of them comes along with you because it becomes part of your story. You know what I mean? That's why, like, I tell people that this book, Distance Guys, is not necessarily just a horse book. There's a lot of people in there, and they did become part of our story too. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's what makes it colorful, right? It's like not only the landscapes, but it's also the people along the way and the other animals and things.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit more about like you're saying that it hasn't changed that much, that people could still trek, that should still do it. Why do you think that?
Well, I wouldn't say it hasn't changed that much because the main thing that has changed it dramatically is technology. Like my trip was in the 80s, and that was, I always say that was at the beginning of the end of an era. That was the edge of a time where our country and our world was going to change dramatically through technology. Um, so I always say solitary travel is different now because back then, if you say you were alone and you were camping somewhere and no one knew where you were camping and you wouldn't reach a payphone, you know, at a trading post or something for a couple of days, that's alone. No one knows where you are. There were times where I think I even said this in the book. I always know where we're going. I just don't always know where we are. Like, you know what I mean? So that's what's changed. There's a woman from my area here that did a similar long distance trip in the last, like it was in the 2000s, not too awful long ago. And hers was a different trip, but she sent me a postcard and she said, "Oh, I'm 37 miles from the Indiana border," or something like that. And my first reaction was, "Oh, how does she know?" But then I realized, well, of course, it's different now. It's not like when you were doing that. She has a GPS and a cell phone, and she's looking up um, blogging and stuff like that, you know. So, and people would send her messages. So she knew that in 37 miles, she was going to hit the Indiana border. So that part of that has changed. There's a certain element of adventure when you really don't know what's around the curve in the road. And I remember the first state line other than Pennsylvania that we came to was West Virginia, and it was a rainy, dark day, but man, that was a joyous moment. Just seeing an old wooden sign there, and I didn't know we were that close. I knew we were kind of near, but anyway, so that was different. But on the plus side of all that technology is that it's probably safer. You know, it's probably definitely safer being able to reach out and call someone or check in or ease your parents' worry or something. So there's that aspect too.
What was your most useful piece of equipment?
Oh, that's a good question. I would have to say my canteen and my collapsible water bucket for the horses. Water became a big issue in the farther west because we were in the southwest. And boy, there's times that I climbed through fences and over to water, windmills that I could see far away and hauled back this folded bucket for the horses to get water. And I think that we could have lost almost anything else except those two things because water was so important.
Oh yeah, no, water's super, super crucial. I remember moving when I moved out further east, and everyone was like, "Why are you so excited about how brown the dirt is?" And I'm like, "There's water."
Yeah, that's a
But
big
yeah.
deal if you came from out west somewhere. Yeah.
All right, so we have two viewer questions. You ready for them,
Okay,
Melissa?
sure.
All right. You'll probably see them at the bottom. I'll read them out loud, and then you can
Okay.
answer. So our first one is, how long did it take you to write the book, and how did you stay focused while writing it? So we have a writing question instead of a horse
Oh,
riding.
neat. Well, actually, I hope I don't scare you off if that's from someone that's trying to write a book themselves, because it took me between 12 and 13 years to write that. So, but I have to say, I was raising a family and helping my parents as they got elderly. And so, what I would do, I kept extensive journals, which helped a lot because, like I always joke, what else was I going to do at night in a tent? So, I had very detailed journals, one all about my feelings and you know what was going on, and then one was all technicalities, roads we were on, how many miles I thought we went, that kind of thing. So over the years I just kept writing it into a better form. And I got a little interest from a publisher a while ago and it didn't work out, but that set me on the path of saying, you know what, I know it's been a long time, but I still believe this is a book. So I just kind of dabbled. I never like full time said, oh, I'm writing a book. I just did a piece here and a piece there. So that's why it took so long. But and several major revisions, including like finishing one version that was like 800 or 900 pages, going through it and starting all over again. So I'm one of those picky writers. So
I have definitely done that. I have that T-shirt of that being like, "This is crap," and like the whole,
well, that first
proposal, like, fight.
yeah,
What?
I remember saying, I finished the book. And like, I set it aside because you do have to do that. And then I remember like going through it and going, oh no, it's like almost makes me cringe some of it now. You know what I mean? But that's how it gets done. And you just keep working away at it. And I think another thing with the writing, which is also true of riding and adventures, you have to find this neat balance where you believe in yourself and your own gut feelings and balance it with people who know more than you do. Like people in the publishing world that said that those original drafts were too long. And I was like, oh no, it's my favorite stories and everything. And then after a while you go, it is too long, so you have to find that balance with writing.
Yeah, I think that's
with everything, really.
That is super good advice. Yeah. Sometimes you have to be like, yes, that's good advice. And sometimes you have to be like, no.
Yep. You stick to your own gut feeling. Yep.
Fantastic question. Let's see our other one. Did you ever hear from the owner of the home, the covered patio, and the like bag?
I know what that means. They mean the lime. That's a typo. There's a
bad.
story. Yep. No, I knew what you meant. I never did because I don't know who they are. Somebody recently that read this book goes, I wonder if you'll hear, like, as the book gets on its way, hopefully it'll go to that part of the country and somebody will say, I've wondered for 30 years about that story. So no, I don't know anything about what they thought, and I did feel really bad about that. But
can you tell the story to the rest of the audience?
Yeah. So actually, it's funny that we just talked about storms in the Midwest. So I was in Missouri, and it was summer, so there was quite a lot of storms. And usually, Missouri's not way out remote, and usually there's a barn or something when you could see a bad storm coming that you could sort of find shelter. And this particular spot, there was a little cluster of homes, but not farms, and there's nothing else around. This storm got pretty bad and bad lightning, and I decided to duck into what I thought was a garage, because most of the time people, if they came upon us or saw us walk in their garage, I would apologize and just say, I just wanted to get out of the storm for a few minutes, and they actually, my experience was always they're like, this is cool. There's a horse in our garage, So I did it. I mean, I had to get out of the storm. So I go through this door. I had jumped off, lead Rainey through. And when I pulled my hood off, I saw that it was not a garage. It was actually like what I call an indoor-outdoor room. It was an enclosed patio. And I had just led my horse into there. So I knocked on the door, and it was nice. There was like wicker furniture with chintz cushions and plants and, candles and everything. So I'm like, oh, I don't think we're supposed to be in here at all. But I knocked on the door and said, hello, seeing if anyone was home and we'd be okay. But no one was. So I said, I'll just sit for a minute. These storms don't last. Well, I did sit, and it was very warm, and the rain was hitting on the roof, and I dozed off. And what woke me up was a ripping noise. And I opened my eyes, and there was just a cloud of white in the air. And Rainey had seen this big brown sack, and the feed that he was used to getting at home comes in a big brown sack like that. And he had ripped it open, and it was lime, like people put outside on, on the ground and on pasture and so on. And its lime is very powdery, and it just filled the air, and it was covering things. And I tried to clean it up, and I just made it worse, smearing on it. And I didn't have a broom or anything. And finally, I said, I'm just making it worse. No one ever was home, and the storm stopped. And so I just left. And I said at the end of the story, that's when they see that room, it's going to be baffling. But what's really going to get them is that there's hoof prints in here, which is kind of like indoors in their house. So we had no choice but to just go onward. So
right. Oh, that's good. So I have a couple more questions.
Sure.
So if anybody else in the audience has any more, please let us know. So the first one that I wanted to know is describe the horse that you have now.
I have a great horse, also a quarter horse, and his name is Starbuck. He's Palomino. And I've been blessed with some wonderful horses in my life that have been with me for a long time, including him. But the reason he's special to me is that he's the horse that most reminds me of Rainey. And that wasn't intentional. I feel like I'll always have a horse. I'll never have another Rainey, and I accept that. And I still love the other ones. I just know I'll never have another Rainey. But he's the closest. He likes being out. He meets people. He watches from the back door. When I come out to the door, I get that friendly little whinny that Rainey used to do, and he touches my heart. You know, some of them you have more of a connection with, and he's that one now. You know, but he's getting older on me, which I wish we could do something about that. But he's a very special horse, Starbuck.
How old is he?
He is he'll be 26 in 2021.
Oh, he still got some time.
He does. And I've had good luck with guys living a long time. And we still ride all the time. If any of my neighbors or anything are watching, like they see us out almost every morning, we try to ride. So he's a good partner for me.
Yeah. Fabulous. Yeah, I knew a horse that we rode until he was 30.
Oh, nice. That's good to hear. I like hearing that.
Oh yeah, I remember one of the last rides I had on him because he lived a long time. He walked away from the barn like, oh, I'm so crippled. I'm so crippled. I'm so tired. So tired. I can't do it. And then you turn him back towards home. Boom.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Or you see him out, you think like, oh, maybe I should stop riding him. Boy, he's dragging. And then you let him out and they like kick up their heels and canter away or something. Yeah. Yeah.
You're like, yeah. How's that going for you over there? Thank you. We always used to tell the old ones, at your age. And they would do things like that. And then what are you working on now?
I'm actually working on a children's book.
Ooh.
And it's a true story, not related to the journey. It's a story I came upon. It is about a horse, but it is a true story. So fingers crossed. I've been playing with that for a little while, and we'll see what happens. Who knows?
Can you tell us anything else about it?
It's just called The One Wild Horse on Wild Horse Island.
Oh, cute.
Yeah.
I love that.
Thank you. I'll tell you more about it if anything comes of it.
Yeah.
We'll stay optimistic.
Right. We must ride through the fear, as we were just discussing, right?
That's true. Yeah.
Well, I think that is a good place for us to call it for the night. Do you have anything else you want to talk about?
Just like to say thank you for having me. This is a story and a subject that's very dear to my heart. I always say when people show interest in it, it sort of keeps these guys alive for me and keeps the memories alive, which is very special to me. And I appreciate the interest in it. And I hope everybody stays safe and well. And we'll check out Distant Skies if they haven't and give it a read.
Well, it's been an utter pleasure having you. And just a quick shout out, you can totally pick up a copy of Distant Skies on Equishopper, including all the other things. Christmas is coming. You have, it's coming up close. See, here's the copy. I have mine too.
Oh, you've got it.
Ooh.
And I think, is it okay to say, I hope I don't sound like I'm bragging, but I think it's an uplifting book. I think people will feel glad they read it. We talked earlier that several people that left reviews and reached out to me said it was good for these times. And I thought that was interesting because it is an older story, but I think that it reminds people that there is an America, and there still is, because we just talked about much more recent adventurers. And it's about just being neighborly and being kind and, and being free. It's about freedom too, to follow your dreams. So I hope people will give it a read.
Yeah, I think it does all those things, and it's the perfect read for the end of 2020 because of not only is it uplifting those ways, but it's also making us all plan, and I think that fits really well.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thanks for being here, and we will see our audience next month.
Thank you, Gretchen. Thank you so much for having us. It was great talking with you.
You too.
Bye-bye.